that, I will turn it over to Jacob, our chair from the governance task force, to kick us off.
Hey,
Mickey?
thanks, Caitlin. And hi, everyone. Good to see you all today. Thanks again for taking the time. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, appreciate it. For those of you who have joined us for the other meetings, really appreciate your interest and your dedication to taking the time to do this. This afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about board makeup and roles and responsibilities based on the input we've received from interviewing folks, talking to constituents, talking to stakeholders, members, components, and the deliberations of the governance task force. I do want to thank all the members of the governance task force who've been dedicating a lot of time to all of this and very thoughtful input and a lot of hard work. So thanks to you all for that. Today, we want to show you what we've proposed for the board makeup and then some adjustments that we want you to take a look at and get commentary on based on input we've had as well. And then really look at beyond that what the roles of the board should be and their responsibilities in particular with communication vehicles that we see as an integral part as we develop this new board makeup and this new board behavior that we think is really critical in terms of addressing a lot of the issues we've been hearing about from the members and components out there. So with that, I want to turn it over to Susanna Kelly, who has been guiding us through all this, and she's going to really start the conversation. I just want to make this is your conversation, so raise your hand, jump in whenever you want. Our role here is to just really get your input and listen to it. And I also want to a couple more things. One is these are works in progress. Okay, so these are here for your review and comment, and by no way are intended to be a final product or shown as a final product. Any graphics there may be are just there to help facilitate the conversation. But please, be aware that we are taking this down and really looking at the input you have to help us develop this. Additionally, we intend to take as much time as necessary in this entire process to make sure that we've had as much input as possible and to get our member voices heard in terms of what we're going to do and the final recommendations that will eventually, any of the bylaws changes, go to the delegates at the 27 conference. So now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susanna Kelly and she can start us off, and I look forward to the conversation. Susanna?
Thanks so much, Mickey. Hey, everybody. It's good to see you. We are in our third round of work sessions here on the governance task force recommendations. And today we're focusing on more specifically on the board composition and roles and responsibilities. So we have a little bit of a longer session today because we're trying to tackle a couple of different areas, but they're really closely related. So as we go through this, if, there's some overlap or we're jumping back and forth, I think that's totally okay. I want to also signal, yes, raise your hand, come off mute, use the chat. If you have some feedback on other parts of the recommendations, say you weren't able to attend the session yesterday on knowledge, but you have an idea about the composition of the KAF or the name, feel free to drop that in the chat. We would love your feedback. And we understand that not everyone can be on all of these sessions. Your schedules don't allow it, and goodness, we all have clients to serve, right? So anyway, as we get started, again, just a welcome to everyone. I want to kind of start us off here as we think about the recommendations for board composition. A couple of things to highlight. The member-facing materials that we had sent out back in January, we did town halls. I'm sure a number of you were involved in those. You saw some changes that were recommended by the task force around board seats, the formation of an executive committee, and some structural changes in terms of how folks are coming onto the board, for example, like terms and things like that. So as we get started here, just as a reminder, because there are currently seats for counselor representatives or members who are nominated by the council, I should say. Now there are seats for members who are nominated by the Knowledge Forum. And both of those groups, the council and the Knowledge Advisory Forum, have officer positions, positions that are added to the executive committee. It's been recognized, we've gotten some feedback, and the task force has identified that the authority and scope of the executive committee is still undefined. So we wanted to talk a little bit with all of you about what that might look like. The idea of an executive committee rate is that they're able to meet more frequently than a board, perhaps make decisions, quickly, timely manner, but also we want the board to be nimble, and be able to be more cohesive across the membership. So there's some tensions there, and we'd love to hear your feedback in terms of what an executive committee might be empowered to decide between board meetings, and where we bring the full board in.
Susanna.
Yes, Susan.
um, I was curious as to maybe putting Josh Flowers on the spot, but what do the bylaws say right now about the XCOM and their responsibility, so we have at least a foundational understanding?
Thanks, Susan, for the question. We currently don't have anything that is defined as an XCOM or officers. If you were on the board in the previous version of our governance structure, there was a group that was defined. And now that we have this current board size, we don't have a defined XCOM.
Kiara, what are your thoughts?
Hey, yeah, thanks. I mean, I think for me, the first thing I thought was like the XCOM would really be mostly about time sensitive or operational decisions, where if waiting for the full board could put that at risk, because it just needs to happen faster. But I do think, in terms of full trust and transparency, anything that impacts governance structure or member perception or representation, that should remain with the full board.
Yeah. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. It's really about trust. And to Josh's point, some of you may remember a previous time when there was an executive committee and the board only met like 4 times a year. That pattern is different today. So that's one of the things I think that we're exploring, is what that could look like. Yeah.
Hey, Susanna.
Hey, David.
This is Dave Crawford. Hey, guys. So back in the past, I did serve on the old board, and as I recall, there were issues that the executive committee would go to the full board and say, "Do you want to give us authority to do these certain things?" And that could be the case. And I think on a case-by-case basis, the board can give that authority to the executive committee. I know that's the way we do operate here. We have an executive committee for our board and then a full board, and we ask the board on many occasions, we're going to be looking at these things. Do you want the executive committee to make those decisions? And then you get a motion and the board allows the XCOM to do that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that example. That's a great one. Yep. Other thoughts or reactions related to the formation, the reformation, I guess, of an executive committee?
Susanna, this is Clark.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
I would like to sort of affirm sort of what David was saying, although
Mhm.
I don't remember Mickey, George, uh, Susan might remember, but there was always a trust there. I don't
Mhm.
remember there being a situation where the board said, no, you shouldn't be making a decision as an ex-com. So I think that's the sort of fundamental thing. And I don't think there's probably not a line in the sand, but more of an attitude.
Yep.
Yeah, Susanna, Mickey here. So
Mhm.
speaking as a former president now, there were some occasions where the ExCom had to, I think, meet very quickly and make some decisions, and they were on specific things. During my tenure, certainly a couple of them were ethics-related issues that we had to address very quickly. Certainly some financial issues that you had to address quickly. But beyond that, typically the XCOM would just interact with the board on a regular basis. So certain things I think that the board can give their approval to the XCOM to be able to react quickly to those things are is an important aspect. And that was really the genesis of how we kind of developed this to put forward to everybody to take a look at.
Great.
Susanna, would it be helpful if I just add one point of clarification to something that
Sure.
Josh said? So currently in the AIA bylaws, actually since we do not currently have an executive committee, the officers do meet for information sharing purposes, but they have no true authority, like Josh mentioned. The president actually does have currently in the governing authority in the bylaws authority to act in the interests of AIA on most things. There are some carve outs where the board has to act or the membership has to act. But in between meetings of the board currently state the president has that authority for most things. And they use their officers as a sounding board, but collectively the officers don't operate as an executive committee. It's just a point of clarity. So right now, solely that authority goes to the president between meetings of the board.
Thanks for that clarification, Caitlin. So the proposal would extend that authority beyond the president to the full executive committee, and friendly amendment here from the conversation that that authority is delegated by the board, that there's a conversation that's happening around what decisions will be delegated. But it's not one person, it's a group of people. Yeah. That was helpful. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, Katie, go
Hi.
ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Katie here. Okay, I feel like I might have missed a meeting or something that came before this one, so I'm just getting
No worries, no
caught up.
worries.
I was just curious though, so in the recommendations feedback document, it says that the executive committee would consist of four officers, plus the council officer and then the knowledge officer.
Yeah.
Are those, I'm just trying to understand, are the four officers, are those specific officers, like different positions? And if
Yeah,
so, just curious which ones.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the four officers reference president, president-elect, secretary, and treasurer. Those exist today. The knowledge officer and the council officer are newly proposed. So those do not exist today, but would be a part of that six-person executive committee.
Okay, and one follow-up question.
Yeah.
If this executive committee does move forward in this format, how would they be communicating back to the full board at their next full board meeting? And is there like, communication afterwards?
Definitely, yes. In
Okay.
fact, I don't even think, Caitlin, you would wait for a board meeting. I think that there's communication that's cycling through more regularly, right?
Yeah, I've seen in other organizations that we would notify the board of the decision of the executive committee by email immediately after the decision was made and then open it up for discussion at the next board meeting.
Yeah, so you're bringing up a really good point, which is that feedback loop. So critical. We've talked about this a lot in the sessions with the board committees and with the knowledge committees, and thinking about what the knowledge forum would look like. That feedback loop and sharing information up and down is critical, and it's part of the trust building piece that needs to happen, we'll talk more about that actually in roles and responsibilities, because there are a number of recommendations that the task force is making that tie back to that.
And if I can add to that, Susanna, to the question, Katie, envisioning this, that anything that the executive committee does as a group, a decision, then immediately upon that decision, it would be shared with the board. And what you want is you want the board to be aware of it and understand the outcome, so that if questions come up through some other vehicle to the board member, they're aware of it and are not ambushed by it, right? So that's the whole idea of the communication process that we want to instill in this, to make sure that everybody is fully aware of what's going on, at real time.
Okay, I want to move us along. Willie, I see your hand raised. Did you want to add into the executive committee conversation?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what David said prior, and just being a past president of AIA New York State, the board actually makes the decisions. That's how we actually do things at AIA New York State with 13 local chapters. And any other small fiduciary items, the executive committee would actually take. But on the larger decision making, we refer to the board to actually make those decisions, because that creates a transparency effect throughout that process. I just want to relate that message. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, one more on this one before you move on. I think
Yeah.
I found that nimbleness is a less salient rationale post-COVID and with the default of remote meetings. And what you really need to, as another alumni of the old board model, you got to avoid the perception that this is where the real decisions are made, the XCOM, which tends to happen. And when you have two groups that have a lot of overlapping authority, and perhaps standing short, placeholder meetings can be scheduled that are canceled if there's no business in the interim phases between meetings. And then I'm thinking back to Jeff Potter had a tradition of always adding a half hour at the end of every meeting for executive session. We didn't always use it, but it was there in case we needed it, and people had it on their calendar. So I think, echoing something Clark said, we got to move at the speed of trust, not because of convenience.
Well said. Yep. This is great feedback. Thank you.
May I ask you a clarifying question real fast?
Sure. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Wedding. I'm the chair of the National Associates Committee. The AIA board restructure and model criteria that's kind of being proposed right now, are these all like proposed considerations that the board would then like kind of vote to cement in place? For example, some of the considerations about like minimum of 10-year experiences, having served on things like that.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So how does all this stuff get approved and finalized, right? Is kind of at the core of your question. The short answer is that all of this is draft. We're in, if you will, well, maybe we're kind of like in design development, I would say. Like, we're not really schematic design. We're moving things along here, but there are a few different ways, and I'm going to actually ask Josh and Caitlin to back me up here in case I misspeak, but there's a few different ways in which governance gets codified within the AIA. The board doesn't just vote to change seats. That's not how it works. In order to make changes like the ones we're talking about here relative to the seats that are assigned officer positions, those are bylaw changes. And those changes go to the delegates at the annual meeting that happens at conference. So there's one happening next month. There'll be another one in 2027. If there are any proposed changes to the seat structure, that will not take place in 2026. That will happen in 2027 at the earliest. So there's a long pathway here of discussion and debate. There are other changes, however, that could be made with changes to the rules of the board. The rules of the board is a different governing document. And for example, board committees live in the rules of the board. So that is a decision that the board could make sooner than an annual meeting. Not to say they're going to make it tomorrow, but just to say different pathway. There are other changes that are proposed in here, particularly when we get into like roles and responsibilities that are really like process changes, and they aren't codified anywhere. There's been a lot of feedback that members would like to see these things codified, that they would like to see somewhere in the governing documents that there is a responsibility of board members to connect with member groups and bring information into the boardroom to share that member voice. That was a significant piece of what we found in our research and what the task force has been talking about. So while one might say like, oh, well, you don't need to put that in, it's just a process change. There might be a reason here in this environment to codify that. And we would need to look at sort of where that lives and the best place for it to be. Now, Josh, Caitlin, what have I messed up and not said correctly?
So you represented the governing documents accurately from my perspective, Susanna.
Josh, you good? Yes.
You're good. Thanks,
Okay.
Susanna.
Cool. Brad, did we answer your question?
Totally. However, there are
Yeah.
just some things on this list that I find a little alarming.
Yeah,
And
let's talk about that because I want to get into the criteria.
well, I don't know if this was like the forum for that kind of discussion.
It definitely
Or
is.
okay. Love
Bring
that for
it.
me.
Mhm.
So the National Associates Committee, as you all know, is officially about 20% of AIA membership. Off the record, about 22% members, falling in that sort of like unlicensed associate member category. And I know there's a couple former NAC chairs on here too, so jump in if I like forget anything. But I do see when I'm reading on this, there's a little bit of like language around minimums and expectations, recommendations. Of course, they're not requirements on here that are, I would say, sort of like foregrounding experiences of more tenured AIA members, which I think is super important. Obviously, like you don't want somebody that's like day one registered jumping in to be the president. You know, there's probably some concerns there. But at the same time, I think it's kind of important for us to kind of like question this, for example, the minimum of 10 years as an experienced licensed architect as a sort of bare minimum. I could say, even just in my time being involved with the AIA, I think it was in like 2024, we had some like younger candidates for the president. I actually think that this would bar them from running, right? So you have these like very passionate and involved individuals that are being barred from the opportunity to kind of like answer the call for service at that higher level, which I feel like as a board, we probably don't really want to like limit that. I would also say that this sort of preference or priority for the College of Fellows members is maybe something that I would like raise a little bit of a red flag over, considering that College of Fellows members typically tend to be of a demographic that's like a little bit more established, a little bit more male, a little bit more not diverse. And I know that those things are being challenged and changed across the committee. So I don't mean to, speak ill of that process at all, but just like as a group, that sort of preference or prioritization of like that as a qualifier when just 2 presidents ago we had somebody that was kind of it wasn't in the College of Fellows and did an amazing job. And so to kind of put that as a preference for somebody that's trying to answer that call to serve, I mean, that would have precluded her from being able to answer that call. So, there's a couple of things in here that I would really kind of encourage us to kind of question. I think that these are really good things for, considering people that are wanting to run for these roles, but I wouldn't go about creating actual like bylaws or rules that would preclude somebody that was more than qualified and willing to be able to jump in and represent all of our community.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you so much for your remarks. I'm glad that you shared that, and that you're serving in the role that you are to represent our associate members. So what I think I'm hearing is that this is where I'd like to see if we could lean with these there are also competency-based criteria that are in the recommendations. So things like financial acumen, legal and ethical judgment, strategic leadership, knowledge of the profession, diversity of perspective. So those are attributes that are agnostic of your years of experience or your membership designation. Does that sound like that's better in a better direction than a criteria like you were just describing? Or are there alternatives maybe that we should consider? And I'm not directing that at you, Brett, directly. I'm inviting conversation from the whole group. Will, I see you have raised your hand.
Thank you. I wanted to maybe change the subject a little bit and get understand the knowledge advisory forum a little bit better. And forgive my naivete for not having been at all of these, but also the criteria and thinking behind what appear to be 3 seats on the board for representatives from that group.
Yes. So the Knowledge Advisory Forum is recommended to be a newly formed group, which would setting aside some discussion about the name, we've debated in a separate conversation if it should be the Knowledge Council or something else. So setting that aside for just a second, the idea is that is a evolution of Bonoco, and it creates a platform for knowledge communities to connect. And Susan, I'd like to give you an opportunity to add in here some of your thoughts. The reason why the task force lifted this up as a new part of the governance structure is because there are currently not clear pathways for folks in the knowledge space to have a pathway to the board. Right now, traditionally, folks are coming up through geographic representation through the components on the council. And so by creating a parallel group that would foster connections between knowledge groups and knowledge communities, those pathways become created. Susan, what would you add to that that you think is important for Will?
Sure. Well, there are 21 knowledge communities, and 58% of our members engage with the Institute through knowledge communities and are not engaged necessarily on the state, local, national level of side of the organization. Many of our profession comes, and I think we seek to attract many more architects to our conference, to our KC conferences, awards programs, and to engage through the lens of knowledge, or as subject matter experts. And many of our members are indeed subject matter experts in healthcare or justice or design or let's see, there are so many different ways, housing, which is so important, and education. So we felt that having representation on the board in terms of policy making, what are we looking at in terms of academic research and the future of the Institute. So I think that that is really where the governance task force and some of the other members who have given input have supported this.
Thank you. And Will, just to close that out, that there is the creation of 3 new seats on the board that would track up there as well.
I think, Suzanne and Mickey here. I think to clarify too that what we're looking for is to get the knowledge communities and quite frankly the strategic council or to be more active in terms of identifying candidates and putting them forward. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific knowledge community or person representing a knowledge community, but rather how do we put forward people with subject matter expertise that can deal directly with the issues we're identifying in our strategic plan to bring those more educated deliberations to the board discussions and that knowledge and be able to help us identify those and have somebody expert in the boardroom with it. And that's the ideal. That's what we're hoping to do, but it also gives an opportunity to really help, hopefully help develop more candidates for different areas of leadership within AIA as well. So it's more than just bringing onto the board. We're really looking at how do we look at a leadership network that we can help to develop with those different people with different expertises.
Jeff,
Hey,
what thoughts do you have?
well, I just want to just kind of point out this as we look at these qualifications for these specific spots on the board of directors and stuff. I think, writing an absolute language of they have to have served on a committee appointed by the AIA president. I mean, that's a pretty small pool of folks. I can think of one of the committees I'm currently serving on now, and one of the members has shown up to 1 out of 6 meetings. So, I mean, technically by this they would qualify, but so I think there's just to recognize that there's other paths to leadership and understanding how the national organization works. I think it's really, really important just to consider that and think about that as we're putting these recommendations together that establish who comprises board members.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Jeff. Also, what's up with your committee member? Give that person a call, find out if they're okay.
We're working
My
on it. They're
goodness.
fine. They're doing better, but
Oh
so
boy.
um
Thank you. Kiara?
Hey, thanks. I know this is probably jumping down to the third question about pathway versus seat, but we're kind of talking about it with the KAF.
Let's go.
So I wanted to jump in here. I sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier. I am the Young Architects Forum chair this year. So I am kind of speaking with a little bit of our AdCom in mind. I do think like the principle of using the pathway instead of a dedicated seat can make sense conceptually and kind of in theory, especially when we're trying to maintain this more nimble board and we don't want to oversaturate it. But I will say that we were really surprised as a group to see that there was quite a shift from the earlier proposal where the dedicated YAF seat is now no longer being recommended. And so there was a lot of excitement from our group previously to see that we finally had this dedicated seat on the board and had this opportunity to be kind of this consistent voice for young architects. And this new model does feel more theoretical, where representation does depend on election or us going through the CAF pathway. And, in terms of elections, we've been very fortunate to have some really amazing go-getters in the past to be YAF alums who have gone to run for at-large directors and have gotten it, but we can't always guarantee that that's going to be the case. And then in terms of the KAF, like we're talking about, this representation is for 20 plus knowledge groups. So there's kind of no way to make sure that the voice of just young architects is what that person's going to be speaking on. They're going to be speaking on knowledge sort of as a whole, which I do think is great to have some of that avenues for some of these other committees that don't currently have a pathway. But, just sort of like Brett was even mentioning, also the young architects make up 20% of this profession, those licensed 10 years or less. And so since we do make up such a big portion, we have a really big concern that this went from a guaranteed voice to a conditional one that also is spread up across, committees. And so, and it's untested. We don't know how well the communication would happen from YAF to CAF and CAF to the board. So really, I'm here to try to understand how this model ensures that our perspective remains consistently present and not just that of chance.
Yeah, appreciate that feedback. And I think, I mentioned it in the chat as well. Someone else asked, similarly, like, where do these constituency groups fall? And I think, it's been debated. Council, KAF, yesterday we talked about having dedicated YF, NAC, and small firm seats on the candidate development committee to ensure that they're a part of the cultivating of the pipeline. And then, of course, there's the board seats, right? So I think really welcome the feedback and the input here of where you all think those constituent voices are best served, and want to underscore the risk of then having to have a seat for everyone, right? Because with a competency-based board, and the competencies we were talking about earlier, not like, you know, at what point do we draw the line? At what point do we say, like, oh, well, these people are in, but those people aren't? And that gets tricky. It came up yesterday in the knowledge group as we talked about KCs versus committees who have practice roles like codes and standards. Where does codes and standards live? And these are great questions for us to explore. So thank you for lifting that up, and continue to welcome feedback and ideas on where the appropriate, where the voice can really be heard. Sarah, you have
Yes.
your hand raised.
Definitely. And I want to, I think, kind of keep building on the topic that Kira has raised, because, and, to Josh Flowers and to Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but the current at-large kind of bylaws really blend the two of these together right now. So there's both membership representation and advocacy that is expected out of the at-large director, and there is knowledge specificity that is expected out of the at-large director. So I do want to express, like, with that understanding of the current at-large structure, this separation of the two, because I think that when elevating and amplifying a board structure that allows a focus, I think there's aspirationally hope that instead of trying to be really good at multiple different things, you're able to be really good at really good at. For that. But I think kind of what we've seen from the council's, AIA of the future and 10-year evaluation, all the way to the initial governance task force to now our recommendations of today, we kind of continue to see pendulum swings. And I think there's been a really big swing right now to this kind of knowledge-based competency that we are seeking. And I think, that does make sense if there's an ideal to align with the operationalizing of our strategic plan for the next 4 years. But I think if the thing we've heard for the last 5 years has been all about transparency, trust, and communication, ensuring, and we ask where is it appropriate to land for our at-large directors, ensuring that not only alignment with subject matter expertise that's amplifying the work of the council, it's amplifying the work of our knowledge communities, but also, on the other hand, what we've heard from the last 5 years, that's amplifying the trust and the transparency and communication. I think what we're hearing and what I've heard from Kira, and also experienced by working in parallel and in tandem with Kira, is that we can't lose that voice and that representation explicitly on the board, whether it comes in multiple different avenues: CASE, AI International, NAC, YAF, Small Firm Exchange, and those are large groups that don't just seek kind of representation by assumption, because that is the individual and kind of the criteria they're bringing to the table, but also by intentional design. And so if we're elevating this, in the current, bylaw statement of our at-large directors, that these are two big pillars for the at-large directors, and now we're splitting them apart, how do we still retain that importance even when the roles become distinct?
Thanks, Sarah. I want to invite Josh or Caitlin to, I think you had invited them into the conversation. Make sure we're giving you a chance to speak.
Caitlin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Sarah, just to clarify, in the current composition of the board, the director at large is truly supposed to be an at-large representative. So in the current construct and model for that director at large, they're not tied to case and knowledge community or specific strategic council. So this would be a different approach to that. So I just want to clarify, in current model, the director at large is truly supposed to be an at-large representing the voice of the membership overall within the organization. And in the proposed model, now we would start teasing out a little bit that the where and how the directors at large are elected through.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, George.
Hi, everybody. Interesting discussion. I really as one of the old timers, I guess, on the call, I really want to support the notion of hearing the youngest voices among our members participate. I mean, the Young Architects Forum, I think, is the place where we can really mine the future. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to kind of come down on the side of retaining that seat, because to me, it's the future of our organization, and to hear young voices and where they'd like to go is really critical. I'm just I mean, this is really great work that's been done, but I just think that's one thing that perhaps we need to revisit. The other thing that I wanted to ask for a little discussion about was the voice of our international members. And I know that we do have a place for international members to participate, but I would also ask that everybody perhaps think about the international members and their voice, because they're really making strong efforts. I mean, I know we're the American Institute of Architects, but we've got chapters worldwide, and I think that they can really bring a special knowledge and expertise to the conversation, really, about where we are and what we're doing, and how we can really enhance the whole global situation of architecture. So I just ask that that be considered again. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Appreciate your comments. We're starting to get into the roles and responsibilities aspects of these recommendations, and I want to pull forward a couple more questions for you to consider around constituency engagement and how we codify how board members are responsible for engaging with members. You have the questions hopefully at hand, but just to explore this a little bit, when you think about like how a member engages with the board, we talk in the recommendations about including attending a member event each year, holding structured communication touch points like office hours and the town halls. I'm forgetting the name, the leadership exchange events. Does that seem like the right expectation when you're thinking about how board members are hearing from the membership and taking that into their decision making? Are there other aspects that you would be looking for that maybe we haven't captured here? Yes, Clark, I'm sorry I didn't see you raise your hand.
No problem. I just raised it. So I will say that I think the competency is a critical thing for an organization of this stature. So that's a sort of underlying assumption on my part. I do think, differently than George's comment about the international, there is a nuance and a difference in the practice and education of architecture across the US and across the world. So that piece of it is really being muted, if I would describe it as that way, in an effort to try and Susan was really good about the knowledge community. I never perceived that the knowledge community interest was a barrier to leadership. It's a desire to be interested in certain aspects of practice or education or whatever is associated with architecture. So in my mind, I think the nuance here is, are we missing the geographic? And I think that the move to competency is far more robust, if that's the best way to describe it, rather than just sort of saying, well, you're from Utah or California or wherever, and I can say without any pause that my practice profile 3,000 miles away from the East Coast is different. Okay, the different kind of clients, different kind of attitudes, and so you can't just sort of it's filtered in to the remainder of that. So anyway, Susanna, so that's my sort of take on that.
Yeah, and just highlighting one thing, Clark, we're not talking about it here, but we did talk about it yesterday. The Candidate Development Committee uh, um, serves such an important role to ensure that the slate of candidates each year is populated with folks that have different practice experiences, are from different regions of the company, are representing different diverse perspectives, not vetting those candidates and excluding people or creating a barrier to leadership, but rather looking at the slate of candidates and going, guys, we don't have an associate running this year. We need to be fostering associate leadership. Or gosh, we don't have I don't know, again, somebody with international practice experience, somebody who has a global portfolio who can provide that perspective. So I think, that's one of the things that we've talked about a lot is the opportunity for the Candidate Development Committee to really foster the pipeline. Leadership takes time, you have years of experience that are cultivated before you're going to be running for a board seat. Not that we want to limit the number of years that you have to check the box, right? Don't get me wrong, but just to say that the task force has talked quite a lot about how the Candidate Development Committee's role could be enhanced to help bring that forward. Garfield, hello. It's been a long time since I've seen you, and you've raised your hand.
Hey.
How are you?
All right. How's pretty good. Pretty good. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, great. Three things, going back to engagement of the board. Of course, I served on the council for 3 years, and I think that's just the board and the constituency, our membership. I think that's a critical part of this process. So one, I like the idea of 60 days prior to any major decisions that gets shared through the relative avenues to the membership before any major decisions. Unfortunately, the flip side of that is, the decisions that can't be shared, regarding, fiduciary responsibility and financial and things of that nature. It kind of leaves it open to who makes that decision. And I think it would be helpful to place that responsibility on the CEO to say, okay, this is the person, in case there is a question, it's like, well, why wasn't that shared? Well, the CEO can find a way to explain that. That's kind of why it's there. So I think that should be contingent on her decision. Other than that, I think most decisions, having seen it from the council perspective, I feel most decisions could be shared. And then in regards to the responsibility of engagement by the board member, I think we're missing a key component, and that's the council. Council is the largest representational body of the membership. Council's engaging the membership on a regular basis, many of which are in their component chapters and very active in their component chapters. So I think greater alignment between the board member and its relative counselor should be there, because I would hate to have the board member have this requirement of holding going to one event a year and doing all these things, and the counselor is not aware of what the board member is doing. So I think that's a missed opportunity if we don't look at that and align their activities a little bit more. That's
great. Thank you. I'm really glad that you underscored this. I don't know what the right word is, but it's a tension point around the advance notice for significant decisions and potential confidentiality issues. And I wonder if, certainly there's a period of trust building that needs to occur in order for, the organization to be in a different place. But I wonder if some of what we talked about earlier with executive committee authority and board giving the executive committee authority to make decisions on certain things, and that feedback loop might start to rebuild some of that trust. You've suggested the CEO making that call as to what decisions might be not able to be shared. I would add to that probably general counsel would be involved in certain confidentiality decisions, like ethics, right? We used that example earlier. Like there are things that come up that don't get shared for very good reasons. Is that sounding like that is a workable framework?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And other thoughts, of course, are welcome.
Yeah, Suzanne, I'd like to call out Jeff Siebold. Jeff, you've had some good comments, I think, talking about some of this in the chat. If you'd like to share, I mean, the communication aspect of what we're putting together is beyond just the organizational structure. And I think, Jeff, you've got some strong thoughts on that. And Jessica, I know you do too.
So yeah, I'm just you know, architects aren't necessarily the first people that anybody would ever pick as the stereotype as great communicators sometimes. At least from the written word, our drawings speak for themselves. But I think our contractors might argue sometimes that maybe that's a missed opportunity as well. So anyway, we have plenty of groups. There potentially could be, a lobby to have 5 new groups next week, tomorrow, at the end of the year. And so having representation from those groups on the board is important. But if we had formal communication channels and just a pathway and a conduit to just say, hey, Jeff is going to be your conduit for Small Firm Exchange. You go to Jeff if you have a comment or a question or something you need to elevate up to the board. That's a great opportunity that we could do, soon. And work through that with our current board structure as we're trying to get through this. I hear and have heard for the last several months of a lot of groups across the organization that are saying, well, we need a seat, we deserve a seat, we have to have a seat, we need to be there. And that's great. And I understand that and I appreciate that. But I'm just saying that just from a standpoint right now, that if we start to talk about and maybe define how we communicate as an organization instead of leaving it so loose, I think a lot of things fall through the cracks sometimes with assumptions. So if we were a little bit more pointed about how we communicated and how we work together, when I was working with the 10-year planning group on the strategic council last year, I mean, one of our criticisms of the org chart was like, hey, this is great. We understand how everything goes together, but there's no arrows pointing back and forth of how the communication should flow back and forth, between the groups. So that's just kind of where I'm headed with some of this. So that could solve some of that representation and the feeling that XYZ group is not represented on the board right now. If you had that voice, I feel like that may start to help. So that's it.
Yeah. And Jeff, just to maybe lift up something I think I'm hearing you say is that's something we could do right now. We don't need to wait.
Yeah. There's, and I want to also just say this in this group with this group of leaders here too. We're not going to get this perfect. We're going to make mistakes and we're going to have to be able to be nimble enough to be able to come back and adjust that. I think we're going to, we're not going to get this right. And no one should expect that we are and have a perfect solution here. I think we just have to recognize that and just have a feedback loop so that we are nimble enough to make good decisions, but then to be able to go back and kind of correct a couple things. And this would be an opportunity to be able to kind of set that up now if we think that that's a decent idea enough to elevate to have a conversation at the board level.
So Jeff, it just sounds like there's an echo here because I know I felt this a decade ago, more than a decade ago. We go through this constantly in this sort of adaptation. And you are right that it needs to be an organic model and not be afraid of making the changes in a short amount of time rather than waiting for all the vetting to occur.
Yeah, and I'll just say from a larger association perspective, particularly in the last 5 years, that kind of governance evolution, regular review of governance structures, and recognizing that it's never perfect is what we're seeing as a best practice. That, organizations who sit in their governance structure for decades and then pick up their heads and go, wow, this really isn't working. That's where change is really hard because you have systems that are almost calcified. But when you're more willing to evolve and consider other, more iterative processes, we know about iteration, right? We do that. That change becomes easier over time. Molly, I see your hand raised.
There is one just to add to that really quick. I'm sorry, Molly.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
There is such a thing, and I was working with another national group for years before I was involved with the AIA, and there is such a thing as changing too much and too frequently. It's like, well, this isn't working, and you just started something 6 months ago, and everybody was just starting. The snowball was just starting to gain momentum, and then they change gears again, and then you start back over again. So but just having a process, a decade's too long. 6 months is probably too short of a timeline. Somewhere in the middle is probably a good time to look and evaluate. So
that's fair. Okay, Molly.
Hi, I'm Molly, Strategic Council representative from Oregon. Thanks everyone on the task force and everyone who's worked on this, first of all, for all the work. I'm trying to figure out how this is a question, but something I'm observing and thinking about is in the new recommendations for structure and responsibilities. I'm just sensing this kind of tension between the idea that board members are expected to represent the Institute as a whole, but also there's these kind of prescribed communication methods, responsibilities, and it seems, like the council directors and knowledge directors are really, are they more representative of those constituents? And I know it says that they're not in here, but maybe I'm the only one picking up on that. And again, I'm not sure what the question is here, but other than I guess there is an expectation that board members are all representative of all of us, correct?
Molly, you're probably not the only one. So let me try to clarify. Whether it's a national board or not, it doesn't really actually matter the scope or size or geographic, whatever. That doesn't matter. But when you are a member of a board, your fiduciary responsibility, as listed here, around the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience is to that organization. However, that does not absolve you from connecting with constituents, understanding their needs, and bringing that voice into board discussions. And once decisions are made, communicating those decisions back to constituents with a rationale as to why that decision was made. So those two things can happen even when that board member is not necessarily representing a particular group. And let me give you an example. So there is a associate representative on the board, right? And let's say that the board is debating and discussing future changes to, I'm making this up, but future changes to like licensure requirements, right? That would change the pathway. And so that representative is responsible, actually all board members are responsible for engaging with constituents and understanding the problem so that they can engage in dialogue around that particular topic, right? But they act in the best interest of the organization. And so communicating that decision back out, I think in my observation has been where there has been a failure in the process, where decisions have been made, but the rationale hasn't been communicated out. And therefore people feel like, gosh, were you listening? Like, I don't even think you heard me. So it is very common for associations to get caught up in the fiduciary responsibilities of a board member in tension with representative models. It's a very normal thing. And it's the reason why you should do regular governance training to remember, yeah, this is why I'm here. This is my duty. This is how this works. And when we do these kind of trainings, we run through scenarios like what happens when you get approached by somebody and they try to lobby you on a decision. How do you handle that? And things like that. So I hope that helped clarify. My example probably wasn't very good one, but
you could have these
I think
distinct
maybe somebody needs to be muted. There we go. My example probably wasn't a good one, but hope to illustrate how those two things are in tension um, and how that can be brought forward in board discussions.
And Susanna, if I can jump into, and I think Molly, part of this is uh, when we're pushing forward the idea that you have 3 seats from the council, 3 seats from knowledge, etc. It doesn't necessarily mean that the council, the people that are going into those council seats have to be current councilors. They could be former councilors. They could be someone who's up to be on the council. They could be somebody who isn't on the council that the council feels is best suited to take that seat at that time. What we want to do is reach down, have them help us reach down into network to find the best leadership that we can and help push them forward, help support them, help get them nominated, and then present that to the delegates for election. That's the ideal, we hope. And it's the same thing with Brett with the NAC or YAF, Kiara, that we want the candidate development committee to work closely with your groups to make sure that you are finding candidates that you can push forward to work for them to make sure we put them up for election, to find those seats that are available to be able to fill with your folks that are from your particular constituency. And that's the whole idea, is that we are really reaching down further into the network to help you push people forward that you feel are the right person at the right time to fill those seats, and allow them the delegates to make those decisions. So you give them good options to be able to make effective decisions when they vote at the conference. But that's the ideal at this point: is how do we hopefully make that work, and really get people more involved in that whole process of really bringing people forward into leadership.
Kurt, did you want to jump in here?
Mickey pretty much covered it, but I just want to, as a part of the governance task force, I think I want to just, the broader concept here is that we need to find constituent groups and feedback loops. And so the 3 buckets of board members we've identified, in addition to the officers, is there are some board members, the at-large members, who are selected by delegates. There are board members identified through strategic council who their constituent groups are the state chapter level representation that is the basis now of the members of strategic council. And the knowledge community delegates or board members are really a surrogate for the interest groups that AI members are a part of. And I appreciate the conversation about Young Architects Forum and Small Firms Exchange and others having roles in it. And I think that's an important conversation for us to have. But I think the point is that some of us are more represent or more associate ourselves with our component structure, and other members may more represent our AIA-ism through whatever group or groups that we're a part of. And we're really just trying to capture a constituency structure and built-in feedback loops that catch people where they're participating as AI members.
Thanks for that, Kurt. One thing we haven't explored yet is how individuals are elected to these board seats. A piece of feedback that we received after the last round of town halls was a concern that there were too many seats on the board that were being elected or selected by a small number of members. For example, today, the council seats on the board are nominated by the council and elected by the council, which means there's about, I don't know how many councilors there are, 70 people who make that selection.
That's not 100% accurate. An outside person can run for that council board seat.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought you just said it was nominated by the council and whatever.
The individual is nominated by the council, but that individual could be anyone. Yes?
I thought they could self-nominate outside of the council for that position and run.
Yeah, I think the term nominating is just throwing off for the counselors in the room. Basically, people just run for the position and are voted on. There's no
Okay.
nomination process. Just
My
for clarity.
apologies.
Nope.
Did not mean to misrepresent anything.
Yeah, no,
What
I just
I'm trying to say is that the election process is occurring only with counselors today, and we have received feedback that individuals would like to explore other pathways for a larger pool of members to elect board members. The knowledge forum seats were structured similarly, in which the knowledge forum would elect their seats on the board. So one piece of feedback we would like to hear from you, a recommended change could be that all of these seats are voted on by the delegates at the annual meeting. That would mean that there would be a couple of additional people to vote on. You can see the slate of candidates today, right? You've got president-elect. Every other year, we vote for secretary or treasurer. There is an at-large seat. This would be in addition to that counselor seat and a knowledge seat. Feedback from this group, thoughts on the election process. Do you all think that delegate voting is a preferred pathway, or the pathway of having a smaller group of people who are voting for those seats? Yes, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Susanna. I was very encouraged to see the changes in the recommendations between the first round and what was presented for this meeting. I think the more voting that's put in the hands of the members at large, the better off we are. And I was one who felt that and feel still that the board today is comprised of too many people who are put forward by relatively small groups, and that includes the council, which is, I think, less than 1.5% of the membership. So the more seats that are filled by voting of members, the better off we are, in my opinion. One thing I think should be explored is the possibility of individual member voting. Not delegates to the conference or the annual business meeting, but actual voting online by every member of the Institute. Other professional associations are doing this with pretty good success. I don't understand why a task force that's looking at governance matters wouldn't consider that. I guess a final point is about the discussion of having different groups represented. It seems to me that there's no bar for that now, and I have full confidence in the ability of the membership to advance people who represent their interests and to make wise decisions about who leads them. So the more we put in the hands of our members, the better off we are. That's my point. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Other thoughts? Feedback?
I'd be curious to get anybody, all of you, hopefully, comment, follow up on what Tom just said about voting. I mean, obviously, that's a monumental change in how we've done things for a long time, but just curious to see what your reaction and thoughts may be to that.
Oh, we got a lot of hands. Garfield.
All right, so hopefully you guys can hear me. So as I understand the way this is being presented, the council, haven't been on the council, would still have potentially have three representatives. And we've had debate in the council, Jessica, Jeff, others, looking at those roles, at least in my personal opinion, being more representative of the council, of the body of the council, not necessarily, yes, you have the fiduciary responsibility. Yes, you're a board member, but still creating that direct conduit between the council and the board. would back to Jeff's point in regards to having the direct lines of communication back to the membership. So my understanding is those positions may still be available, but as opposed to the election process happening within the council, you saying that those, I guess the council will effectively nominate those positions, and then during the membership meeting or the business meeting, those same candidates would be part of a larger slate of candidates to get ratified by the membership. I mean, are we now opening the door for additional debate beyond the council for those counselors to be on the board? I think that will open up a bag of worms that I don't think we want to, get involved with. Because now you're talking individuals. Now you're talking. Now it's already a burden, and it's not so much within the council, because I think we handle it. And yes, anyone could run, whatever. But the bottom line is you're just lobbying, or you're just campaigning within the council, and that tends to be a little bit less onerous or less work. Now you're asking those same individuals who've done the work to get the confidence of their counselors to represent the AIA council, whatever, on the board. Now you're asking those individuals to join the foray, join the fray of candidate, because you can't put their name ballot in front of the membership. Membership's like, who the heck is this person? Oh, he's been on the council. I don't care. I don't know. So now you're putting that additional work on those candidates to now present themselves at the membership meeting, and I think that would be too much.
Well, I hardly think the job of this group is to make it easy for people to reach office. I mean, I think that is something we should work toward and strive toward, and to meet more members, persuade more members that you're qualified, that you have something to offer. And I think, just to repeat the point, putting it in the hands of the members is where it belongs in a membership organization. And it's not a collection of special interest groups. It's a collection of architects who are in practice, and that's the nature of the association. So trying to take away from members the authority to vote upon who it is that represents them seems to me a move in the wrong direction.
Brett, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there's a couple. We actually just had a candidate forum for the president and the treasurer and the secretary. So this year, as many of you know, we have quite a larger number of candidates. So it was a little difficult, I would say, to have a candidate forum where all of those people were available. And also shout out to Kiara for inviting the NAC to join that. So we had kind of like a joint NAC and YAF forum, which was helpful, that we could all be there in the same way that like that large group, instead of making that large group try to meet twice. But I think this would introduce an additional 3 positions with their own slate of candidates for each one. So that's one thing to consider. I would also add that what I've learned is that no state component is built the same from working with the National Associates Committee. I can say, for example, I do not have, I'm not a state rep for the NAC anymore, but I was the state rep for Ohio. While I was on the board for Ohio, I did not have a voting opportunity on our board, and I certainly didn't have the opportunity to be a delegate at the national meeting. So other states and their other state reps, they do have the opportunity to be a delegate at these meetings. And some local components, because that's how our bylaws work, you have like a set number of people that could be associates that can vote in these sort of elections. So that's kind of nice, but it's never really guaranteed, right, for associates, which is why I'm like super intrigued by what Tom had said about that sort of like open voting. And then to kind of just add one more thing onto that, and not to like muddy the waters too much, but I do kind of wonder if perhaps there were an XCOM and then there were sort of like member delegates. And so then this kind of gets like House of Representatives versus Senate E.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm like a little maybe interested that like one is a general vote and one is an XCOM vote, right? So like if you had one where it was like all of the members of the AIA could vote, so everybody kind of had a voice on that. And then perhaps there was a sort of like coalition of delegates that could vote for like XCOM, that sort of like next level. I don't want to, hierarchy.
No, I see
the
what you're
board,
saying
but
though. I mean, you're parsing that there are different ways to get at this and that delegate votes could be retained in addition to adding a larger membership voice. Yeah,
exactly.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, a little bit of side chat. Someone asked, has AI ever explored an all-member vote before? We don't think so, but we're going to look into it because the Institute is like 175 years old or something like that. So it's possible that at some point it's been explored, but probably the delegate model is based off of a very obvious kin with the Electoral College. We're all familiar with it. It's geographic based. It's common in federated groups like AIA to see that sort of thing because historically we've been organized by geography. That does not necessarily mean that that's the best modern approach, right? So great comments, great feedback. And I like the exploration of maybe a few different combinations of approaches here. Jeff?
Yep. Just want to add to your comment about this, Thomas, and to Garfield's point too, that I think just that if it is an individual vote and I think we do have to reduce the burden somewhat of people that are campaigning and running, or else we're going to limit the pool of candidates to principals and above and senior leadership of firms that can take that time off for the amount of time it would take to have to lobby and go address all the different groups. I think we would really be limiting a lot of the younger voice if we are not careful about considering that. And so within that, and just thinking about that as an organization, then maybe we have to consider how we handle campaigns and how we handle speeches and helping open up that door for have an equal opportunity for candidates that are qualified to be able to run for the board and to be able to get their voice out there.
Thank you, Jeff. Tom, you're going to jump in?
Just to respond quickly, it seems to me that election process has actually been marginalized, certainly in comparison with where it was 10 years ago. Now there are no speeches to the entire membership present at the conference. It's just videos. I hardly think there's a burden involved. If anything, it's been diminished over the years, and I think we should return to an approach where candidates are exposed as much as possible, as often as possible, to the people who will elect them, and that should be live performance, not a videotape presentation. So I think, I understand the caution, but we've had many young candidates, including many sole practitioners. And I don't think that that's really much of a barrier to entry in terms of campaign burden.
We have about 10 minutes left in our session. For those of us on the East Coast, it's a long day. Clark, I know you just finished lunch, but there's a note here in the chat from Kathleen encouraging you to share your feedback on the candidacy process because I understand AI is looking for that feedback. So that's great. Thank you, Kathleen, so much for sharing that. Clark and Rusty, you're both raised your hands. Who wants to go first? You switched around in my order.
Go for it, Rusty.
Go, Rusty, he says.
Yeah, I actually think Clark was first, but
I know, and then he I don't know what happened. He jumped over on me.
I don't know. But yeah, I'll go for it. I just wanted to give the perspective of a large local chapter in an all-member vote. I don't think my members care enough to vote. for at the national level. I mean, just remember, we're talking about national elected leaders, and my members are quite removed from the national level. We cast all of our votes together because we're a large chapter, so we have 150 or some votes that our president carries to the convention every year. And we have to work, I have to work really hard to get our board to educate themselves on who's running so that we can have educated, knowledgeable conversation to choose the folks that we think we should vote for and lead the national component. I don't know how that looks for, and you can probably look at like national surveys that we send out, the amount of engagement that you get at the local level, the rank and file members. I don't know how it looks. I think I think it's something to consider. I think there's this expectation or an assumption that's being made that members want to vote for this, and know who they're voting for. And I don't think that's really the case. I've been in this job for 15 years and I've never had someone not on the board say, hey, when y'all consider these people, I hope that you'll vote for this person or that person because they care that much. Just 2 cents there.
Appreciate
Thank you.
that. Hey,
Thank
Clark.
you. Thank you, Rusty. Well said. I agree with you. In California, where I often feel like the eastern part of the United States, and I grew up there, is overly dominated by the representation because the ease at which you can move around in order to get to home base in DC is obviously much easier. But Susanna, I wanted to just sort of ask maybe briefly about the attachment associated with the criteria that you established, and I got a chance to look through it, and some of the stuff sort of gave me heartburn a little bit.
Yep. Yep.
One was I would never have been elected because I was never a state president, but I was a president of a large chapter amongst the big SIBs. So I would say that's a real restriction in terms of that stepping. It was not in the cards. I was encouraged. People also like Marvin Malika jumped from the VP to president because his provost would never let him take the time. So those are really important things. The second is, and Brett, I'm going to sort of take issue with one of the things you said, and I understand you're well intended, but I really believe, and I know this is rear view mirror stuff, that a president should be a member of the College of Fellows. And the reason I say that, it is not a role designed to be one that you get fellowship for, okay? It is one where you continue to serve the organization, and feeling that if you served as president, you were a natural in being a member of the fellows. So I sort of feel in some ways, maybe it's a filter in order to get an accomplishment, and you can get fellowship young and early. And I would say you need to look at the statistics on the diversity of members members who have been elevated to the College of Fellows. It's really changed in the last decade in a really nice way. And lastly, the only other thing that I would say too is the candidate development committee needs to have perhaps a rotating former president. I think the inside discussion on candidates means that it's a small group. This is the same conversation about the council. And if we're gonna use it, this year is a perfect example of, I think, as somebody said earlier, too many candidates and a big effort in order to have people decide on. I think Rusty is right. A lot of people turn off to it. They don't want to bother with it. They're wedded to their local chapter or state chapter in that. So anyway, those are my thoughts, Suzanne.
Thanks, Clark. Katie?
Oh yeah, okay, I might poke the bear here. I think I think that having okay, being an FAIA member is awesome, and it does show that you've had a lot of leadership experience. I'm curious if anyone wants to talk about the percentage of women that are FAIA and how that would severely limit women to participate in running for the presidential position. Just this is a conversation that we've had in my office recently, just in Washington State. There's just a very low percentage of women that are FAIA. And I would just hate to see that become another barrier.
Thank you all so much for the conversation today. I am actually, initially I was like 90 minutes. Wow, this is going to be a lot. We covered so much ground. Your input has been really helpful. Thank you for debating, for discussing, for coming off mute, and really engaging in the dialogue today, because this has been a robust conversation on super important governance changes that are being considered. Mickey, Caitlin, any closing thoughts here before we wrap?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. This is awesome. I mean, it's just been a really great, robust discussion. I would also ask that if you want to follow up with some of your comments in a written format, so we can make sure we've got it all documented that we can keep into our deliberations on the task force, please use, and correct me if I'm wrong, Caitlin, please use the portal and on the website through the governance link there to do so. And we would love to see that and invite you to please share that with us. So thanks again, everybody.
Cool. And in the chat now, you've got a link to that form. You've also got some links to information about the town hall that's happening on May 15th, on the feedback for the candidacy process going to the CDC. And Kathleen, we have one more session tomorrow, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Yes. So how do folks find out about that if they need to know more?
So that last link is to the Governance at AIA webpage, where all of our updates, including registration for each town hall, is listed.
Perfect. All right. So this last link, aptly named AIA/leadership/AIA-governance. I can find that breadcrumb. Will take you to a lot of good information, but not the least of which is a link to register for tomorrow's session, which is about the council. So we look forward to maybe seeing some of you there. Okay. Have a good evening, afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.